In the dawn of civilization, under the watchful eyes of the sun god Ra, a story was born that would echo through eternity. It is a tale not of gods and monsters, but of a love so profound it challenged the very boundaries of existence. This is the saga of Isis and Osiris, the divine rulers of a golden age, whose perfect union illuminated the land of Egypt. But even in paradise, a shadow can fall. A brother's envy, festering in the heart of the powerful god Set, would ignite a betrayal that shattered the cosmic order. It sparked a desperate quest, a journey of a grieving queen who refused to let go, who would gather the fragments of her lost love and defy fate itself. This is not just a myth of creation and destruction. It is the ultimate love story, a testament to the belief that devotion can conquer the finality of the end, and that from the deepest loss, a new hope can arise. In the dawn of time, when the world was newly formed from the embrace of Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess, a new generation of deities was born to shape the destiny of humanity. Among them were two who were destined to rule, not just as sovereigns, but as soulmates, Osiris and his sister wife, Isis. Together, they ascended to the throne of a young, untamed Egypt, and with their ascension came an era of unparalleled peace and prosperity, a time later remembered as the Golden Reign. Before their rule, humanity lived in a primitive, chaotic state. It was Osiris who walked among them, a benevolent teacher and a divine king. He taught the people the secrets of the land, how to cultivate wheat and barley, how to press grapes into wine, and how to brew beer. He gave them laws to create order and justice, establishing the foundations of a great civilization. Under his gentle guidance, the fertile black lands along the Nile bloomed, and hunger became a memory. His partner in this grand endeavor was Isis, a goddess of profound wisdom and immense magical ability. While Osiris taught the practical arts, Isis gifted humanity with culture and compassion. She showed women how to grind corn, spin flax, and weave cloth. She was the great healer, who knew the remedies for sickness and the incantations to ward off harm. She was the model of the devoted wife and mother, her love for Osiris a shining example for all. Their reign was a perfect partnership. They governed with a shared vision, their love for each other mirrored in their love for their people. The kingdom flourished, a testament to their balanced rule of strength and wisdom. So successful was his model of civilization that Osiris decided to share his knowledge with the rest of the world. He embarked on a great journey, leaving his beloved Isis to rule in his stead. She governed with such skill and fairness that the kingdom did not miss a step, its prosperity continuing unabated. The people adored their king and queen. Osiris was the source of their abundance, Isis the wellspring of their wisdom. Their reign was a symphony of harmony and light. But even in the brightest light, shadows can form. While the world celebrated the divine couple, a silent resentment was taking root in a heart close to the throne, a darkness that watched the golden age and saw not perfection, but an opportunity. While Osiris and Isis presided over the lush, life-giving lands of the Nile, their brother Set was the master of a different domain. His was the Red Land, the vast, unforgiving desert that bordered the fertile valley. He was the god of chaos, the lord of violent storms, and the untamed wilderness. Where Osiris represented order, cultivation, and the gentle rhythm of the seasons, Set embodied the raw, unpredictable, and often destructive forces of nature. This fundamental difference was reflected in their very beings. Osiris was often depicted as a handsome, serene ruler, the picture of stability. Set, however, was portrayed as a being of immense strength, his form often combining human and animal features, with a distinctive, mysterious head that scholars still debate today. He was a figure of awesome power, but one who stood apart, an outsider in the ordered world his brother was building. He watched from his desert kingdom as the people of Egypt showered Osiris with adoration. He heard the songs they sang of the grain god who filled their storehouses, and the wise king who gave them laws. And with every hymn of praise for his brother, a bitter resentment grew within him. Set did not see benevolence in Osiris's rule. He saw softness. He did not see civilization as progress, but as a cage, taming the wild spirit of the world that he himself represented. He felt his own immense power, the strength that could whip sand into a fury and shake the foundations of the earth, was being marginalized and forgotten. He was the god of the storm, yet his brother, the god of the harvest, received all the glory. This sense of being overshadowed, of being relegated to the barren fringes while his brother held the fertile center, began to consume him. His pride was wounded, his ambition ignited. The love the people had for Osiris became, in Set's eyes, a personal affront. It was a constant reminder of what he was not and what he believed he should be. The shadow of his envy began to stretch from the red sands of the desert towards the green banks of the Nile. It was no longer a fleeting emotion, but a hardening resolve. He began to look upon his brother not as family, but as an impediment, an obstacle standing between him and the throne he now coveted with every fiber of his being. In the desolate silence of his domain, a dangerous plan began to take shape, born of jealousy and a thirst for ultimate power. The kingdom of Egypt continued to bask in the warmth of its golden age, entirely unaware of the cold front gathering on its desert borders. While Osiris continued his benevolent rule, trusting and open-hearted, his brother Set moved through the shadows, his heart set on a treacherous course. He knew he could not challenge the popular king directly. Osiris was too beloved, his authority too absolute. A direct confrontation would be folly. Set needed a plan that was as cunning as it was ruthless, a plot that would remove his brother without turning the entire nation against him. His strategy was one of subversion. He began to seek out others who might harbor their own hidden resentments or unfulfilled ambitions. He moved quietly through the courts and provinces, his words like poison, twisting perceptions and planting seeds of doubt. To the ambitious noble, he spoke of greater power. To the disgruntled priest, he hinted at a return to older, more chaotic traditions. He presented Osiris's peaceful nature as a weakness, a sign that the kingdom was growing soft and vulnerable. He played on fears and ignited vanities, slowly building a coalition of the discontented. According to the ancient texts, he gathered 72 co-conspirators, a secret cabal united by their desire to see a change on the throne. These clandestine meetings took place far from the watchful eyes of the court, in the dead of night, where whispers of treason could be exchanged freely. All the while, the great goddess Isis, whose intuition was as powerful as her magic, felt a growing disquiet. She sensed a dissonance in the kingdom's harmony, a subtle, discordant note beneath the surface of peace. She saw a new watchfulness in the eyes of certain courtiers and felt a coldness in the palace halls that had once been filled with warmth. Yet, the source of this unease remained elusive, a phantom she could not grasp. Her warnings to Osiris were gentle, born of a wife's concern, but her trusting husband could not imagine such treachery from his own brother. As his network of conspirators solidified, Set put the final piece of his plan into motion. He commissioned the finest craftsmen in the land to build a magnificent chest. It was constructed from the most precious woods, inlaid with gold and silver, and adorned with intricate carvings. It was a masterpiece of artistry, a thing of breathtaking beauty. But its beauty was a mask, concealing a dark and terrible purpose. As the final touches were placed on the gilded box, Set's plan was complete. The trap was meticulously prepared, and the conspirators were ready. All that remained was to lure the unsuspecting king to his fate, To conceal his treacherous intent, Set orchestrated a grand spectacle of brotherly affection. He announced a lavish banquet, ostensibly to celebrate the return of Osiris from his travels and to honor his magnificent reign. Invitations were sent throughout the kingdom, promising a night of unparalleled festivity. The palace was decorated with flowers and fine linens, the air filled with the scent of incense and the sound of harps and flutes. It was a perfect picture of celebration, a masterful illusion designed to disarm its most important guest. Osiris, noble and without a trace of suspicion, accepted his brother's invitation gladly. He saw it as a sign that any past tensions were forgotten, a chance to reunite with the brother he loved. He arrived at the feast to great acclaim, greeted by Set with a warm embrace that hid a cold heart. The night unfolded in a whirl of merriment. Wine flowed freely, dancers entertained the guests, and the hall echoed with laughter and cheerful conversation. Set was the perfect host, ensuring his brother's cup was always full and his spirits high. At the peak of the celebration, when the guests were jovial and unsuspecting, Set signaled for the centerpiece of his plan to be revealed. Servants carried in the magnificent gilded chest, its beauty dazzling everyone in the hall. Set announced a game. This exquisite prize, he declared, would belong to whomever it fit most perfectly. The proposal was met with enthusiastic approval. One by one, the guests, including Set's own conspirators, took their turn. A man too tall, another too broad. None could fit within its precise dimensions. The game seemed a light-hearted diversion, adding to the evening's entertainment. Finally, Set gestured to his brother. It was the king's turn. Amused by the game and confident in his own perfect proportions, Osiris laughed and readily agreed. He stepped into the ornate box and lay down, finding that it was, indeed, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for him alone. In that instant, the atmosphere of the entire hall changed. Before Osiris could react, Set and his followers sprang into action. The heavy lid was slammed shut, plunging the king into confinement. The sounds of celebration were replaced by the frantic hammering of nails and the hiss of molten lead being poured to seal every crack. The joyous feast had transformed into a scene of shocking betrayal. The trap had closed. Osiris, the beloved king of Egypt, was entombed, his fate sealed by the very brother who had just welcomed him with open arms. The echoes of the feast faded into a chilling silence as Set's conspirators lifted the now sealed chest. Their task was not yet finished. Under the cover of darkness, they carried their heavy burden from the palace, through the sleeping city, to the banks of the mighty Nile. There, with grim purpose, they heaved the gilded sarcophagus into the river's dark currents. The chest, a beautiful prison, was swept away, carrying the living king on a silent, solitary journey. It drifted down the great river, past the fields and villages that had prospered under his rule, and out into the vast expanse of the great green, the Mediterranean Sea. For days it floated upon the waves, an opulent vessel on an aimless course, until it finally washed ashore in the distant land of Byblos, in modern-day Lebanon. There, on the foreign coast, a miracle occurred. A sacred tamarisk tree sprouted from the sand and grew with supernatural speed, its branches wrapping around the chest, enclosing it completely within its trunk. The tree grew to be the most magnificent in the land, its fragrance perfuming the air. The local king, Melkart, was so impressed that he ordered it cut down and brought to his palace to be fashioned into a grand pillar, unaware of the divine secret sealed within its heart. Back in Egypt, the light of the Golden Age had been extinguished. Set seized the throne, his rule as harsh and unforgiving as the desert storms he commanded. Fear replaced joy, and tyranny replaced justice. The land itself seemed to mourn its lost king. Harvests failed, and despair spread through the kingdom. When news of the betrayal finally reached Isis, her world collapsed. The loss of her husband, the partner of her soul, was a blow that shook the foundations of her being. But her devastation quickly forged itself into an unbreakable resolve. This was not an end she would accept. Love, in her, was a force more powerful than any throne or any conspirator. She cast off her royal attire, donning the simple garments of a commoner. In a profound act of dedication, she cut her lustrous hair, a symbol of her new, singular purpose. Her life as a queen was over. Her life as a seeker had begun. Alone, she set out from the palace, her heart filled with a fierce determination. She would wander the earth. She would use every ounce of her wisdom and magic. She would not rest until she found her beloved and brought him home. Under the benevolent rule of Osiris, Egypt flourished. He was more than a king. He was a teacher. He guided his people from a state of primitive struggle to one of enlightened civilization. He taught them the rhythms of agriculture, how to coax life from the fertile black soil of the Nile Valley. He gave them laws, creating a society built on justice and harmony. Music, art, and worship filled the land, a testament to the peace he had cultivated. Osiris was beloved, seen as the source of all that was good and prosperous. But where there is great light, shadows inevitably gather. His brother, Set, was the embodiment of the untamed world that Osiris had ordered. He was the harsh desert wind, the violent storm, the raw chaos that civilization sought to hold at bay. He watched his brother's success not with pride, but with a growing, corrosive jealousy. In his eyes, Osiris's order was a cage, and his popularity an intolerable affront. Ambition festered in Set's heart, a dark mirror to his brother's bright reign. He would not be eclipsed. He began to plot, his whispers finding fertile ground in the hearts of others who resented the king's control. He gathered 72 conspirators, each with their own grievance, and united them under a single, treacherous purpose. The plan was as cunning as it was malevolent. Set organized a magnificent banquet in his brother's honor. The palace hall was filled with music, laughter, and the finest foods and wines of Egypt. It was a perfect picture of the kingdom's prosperity. At the height of the celebration, Set presented a gift. It was a chest of exquisite craftsmanship, made from the finest cedar and inlaid with gold and ivory. He announced with a grand flourish that this prize would belong to whomever fit within it perfectly. One by one, the guests tried, but none were the right size. Finally, Osiris, good-natured and unsuspecting of any foul play, agreed to try. He laughed as he lay down inside the chest, remarking on its comfort. It was a perfect fit. In that instant, the mood shattered. Set and his co-conspirators slammed the heavy lid shut. The sound echoed through the hall like a death knell. They hammered it closed and sealed it with molten lead, transforming the beautiful gift into an inescapable prison. The music stopped. The laughter died. A wave of shock and horror swept through the guests as they realized the depth of the betrayal. The king of Egypt was trapped, his fate sealed by the hand of his own brother. The grand hall, moments before a scene of joyous celebration, was now frozen in stunned silence. Set stood victorious, his authority absolute. The conspirators, now his loyal enforcers, moved with chilling purpose. The betrayal was complete, the transfer of power swift and brutal. Egypt had a new master, and his reign promised not the gentle order of Osiris, but the unpredictable fury of the storm. The immediate task was to dispose of the king, to ensure he could never return. The sealed chest, containing the hope of Egypt, was lifted and carried from the palace. Set's plan was not merely to hide his brother, but to commit an act of profound sacrilege that would sever Osiris from his kingdom forever. They brought the chest to the banks of the Nile. This was no ordinary river. It was the sacred artery of the nation, the source of all life, a deity in its own right. To defile its waters was to attack the very soul of Egypt. With a final, decisive effort, the conspirators pushed the chest into the current. It bobbed for a moment, a stark, wooden scar on the holy waters, before being caught by the river's inexorable pull. The vessel began its silent journey, carrying the imprisoned king downstream, past the fields he had taught the people to cultivate and the temples built in his honor. The news of the king's fate spread like a plague. Isis, his devoted wife and queen, was shattered. Her world, once filled with light and love, had been plunged into an abyss. Beside her, her sister Nephthys, who was also Set's wife, was consumed by a secret, terrible grief. She was torn between her loyalty to her tyrannical husband and her love for the family he had just destroyed. Her complicity, even through silence, would haunt her. Across the land, a palpable sense of dread took hold. The divine harmony that had sustained Egypt was broken. The chest drifted on, leaving the familiar black earth of the delta behind. It passed into the Great Green, the vast and intimidating expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. Now adrift on the open water, the king of Egypt was truly lost, a captive not just in a box, but in the immense, indifferent wilderness of the sea. All hope seemed to be floating away with him, disappearing over the horizon. In the wake of Osiris's disappearance, a gloom settled over Egypt. Set's rule was as harsh as the desert sands. The natural order, so deeply connected to the rightful king, began to fray. The Nile's inundation was less predictable, and a sense of fear replaced the prosperity that had once defined the two lands. But while the kingdom mourned, Isis refused to surrender to despair. Her profound grief began to transform, hardening into a diamond-sharp resolve. Love became her armor, and determination her weapon. She would not accept that her husband was gone forever. She would find him. Understanding that she could not move freely as a queen in a kingdom now hostile to her, Isis made a difficult choice. She shed her royal linens and jewels, symbols of a life that no longer existed. Dressed in the simple garments of a commoner, her face obscured by a veil, she began her quest. Her search started in the labyrinthine waterways of the Nile Delta. She walked the dusty paths between villages, her feet carrying her through the land she once ruled. She spoke to everyone she met, her questions gentle but persistent. She listened to the stories of fishermen mending their nets, merchants haggling in the markets, and even children playing by the riverbanks. Every whispered rumor, every fragment of a story was a potential clue. Her journey was arduous, a pilgrimage of sorrow and hope. She traversed sun-scorched plains and navigated treacherous marshes, places where the order of Osiris gave way to the chaos of Set. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The trail was cold, and at times her spirit wavered. Yet, the memory of her husband and the love she bore for him fueled her strength, pushing her onward when all seemed lost. Then, a breakthrough. In a small village near the coast, she came upon a group of children. They told her a strange tale of a magnificent, fragrant chest they had seen floating down the river some time ago. They remembered how it had been carried past them on the current, heading directly toward the mouth of the Nile and the Great Green Sea. This was it, the first tangible piece of evidence. The scent they described was unmistakable. Hope, which had become a faint ember, was fanned back into a flame. Osiris was not in Egypt. Her search would have to extend beyond the familiar shores of her homeland. Standing on the coast, looking out at the endless horizon of the Mediterranean, Isis knew her journey had only just begun. Isis secured passage on a merchant vessel bound for the lands across the Great Green. The ship, laden with grain and papyrus, was a world away from the gilded royal barges of the Nile. She was just another passenger, her divine nature hidden beneath her humble disguise. The sea voyage was a trial of endurance. Storms tested the resolve of the crew and the strength of the ship's timbers, while long, windless days tested the passengers' patience. For Isis, the vast, unpredictable sea was a reflection of her own uncertain future. She was sailing into the unknown, guided only by a sliver of information and an unshakable faith in her love for Osiris. After what felt like an eternity, the sailors sighted land. A new coastline rose from the horizon, and soon the ship sailed into the bustling harbor of Byblos. The Phoenician city was a vibrant hub of international trade. The air was thick with the scent of cedarwood, salt, and exotic spices. The sounds were a cacophony of foreign tongues and the clamor of a busy port. Isis stepped ashore, a solitary figure in a land that was utterly alien to her. Here, she was not a queen, not a goddess, but a stranger. Her search began anew, but in this unfamiliar city, she had to rely on intuition. She wandered the streets, listening to the conversations in the marketplace, observing the customs of the people, searching for any sign or omen. Soon, she began to hear a peculiar local legend that was on everyone's lips. The story told of a wondrous event that had occurred on the shoreline. A mysterious, ornate chest had washed ashore. From that very spot, a magnificent tamarisk tree had sprung up, growing to an impossible height in a single night. The tree was so straight, so strong, and gave off such a divine, sweet fragrance that it became the talk of the entire kingdom. The fame of this miraculous tree reached the royal palace. King Malcander and Queen Astarte, captivated by the tale, ordered the tree to be cut down. They had it brought to their palace and, with great ceremony, fashioned it into the central pillar that supported their great hall's roof. As Isis listened to this story, a certainty washed over her. Every detail resonated with the truth she held in her heart. The fragrant wood, the chest washed ashore, it could be no other. Her beloved Osiris was here, entombed within the very heart of the royal palace of Byblos. She had found him. But he was closer, and yet more inaccessible, than ever before. Isis knew that a direct approach would be folly. She could not march into the palace of a foreign king and demand he surrender the central pillar of his home. She was an unknown woman in a strange land, and her claim would sound like madness. Her strategy had to be one of subtlety and patience, weaving her magic into the fabric of the royal court itself. She made her way to the city well, the social heart of Byblos, where the queen's own handmaidens came to draw water and exchange news. There, Isis sat, a figure of quiet grace. When the handmaidens arrived, she offered to help them, braiding their hair with a skill that seemed otherworldly. As she worked, she breathed upon them, infusing their hair with a perfume of ambrosia, a scent so enchanting it seemed to come from the gardens of the gods. When the servants returned to the palace, Queen Astarte was immediately captivated by the heavenly fragrance that surrounded them. She had never experienced such a beautiful scent. The queen demanded to know its source, and the handmaidens told her of the mysterious and kind Egyptian woman at the well. Intrigued by this tale, Queen Astarte summoned Isis to the palace. Presented before the queen, Isis maintained her humble demeanor. She spoke with wisdom and gentleness, and Astarte, seeing a nobility in the stranger that transcended her simple clothes, was deeply impressed. She offered Isis a position within the palace as the royal nursemaid to her infant son. Isis accepted at once. Her plan was working. She had gained entry to the very place that held her husband. By day, she was a devoted nurse to the young prince. But by night, her divine purpose emerged. She would secretly place the child into the purifying embers of the hearth, a magical ritual designed to burn away his mortality and grant him eternal life. After performing the rite, she would transform into a swallow, flying tirelessly around the great tamarisk pillar, her soft cries a lament for the husband imprisoned within. One evening, Queen Astarte, drawn by a strange sound, entered the nursery. To her shock, she saw her baby resting peacefully within the glowing embers. She let out a terrified scream, shattering the sacred ritual and forever denying her son immortality. The spell broken, Isis revealed her true form. She stood before the stunned queen not as a servant, but as the magnificent and powerful goddess of Egypt. Awe and fear filled Astarte's face. Isis then told her story, of her lost husband, the king Osiris, of the treachery of his brother, and of the sacred pillar that was now the king's tomb. She looked at the queen, her divine authority undeniable, and made her demand. The pillar must be hers. The journey from Byblos was a silent, urgent procession. Isis, now guardian of a sacred treasure, sailed for the shores of Egypt, her heart a storm of hope and trepidation. She had reclaimed her husband, but he was still locked away, a silent king in a wooden prison. Upon reaching her homeland, she sought refuge in the dense, labyrinthine marshes of the Nile Delta. Here, among the whispering papyrus reeds and watchful crocodiles, she could work her magic undisturbed. Shielded by the thick foliage and the protective embrace of the river, she laid the coffin down. With her was her faithful sister, Nephthys, whose loyalty had never wavered. Together, the two goddesses began the most delicate and powerful ritual imaginable. Invoking the ancient words of power taught to her by the wise god Thoth himself, Isis began to unravel the seals of the coffin. The air grew thick with energy, a palpable hum that stirred the water and bent the reeds. As she worked, her form began to shift. She was no longer just a queen or a wife, she was a vessel of creation. Her arms elongated, sprouting feathers of iridescent black, her body slimming into the sleek form of a kite, a graceful bird of prey known for its high, piercing cry. She had become a living embodiment of divine magic. With a beat of her powerful new wings, she rose above Osiris. She hovered over his still form, a shadow of life against the stillness of his slumber. She was not merely a bird, she was a conduit for the breath of life itself. She lowered herself, and with the rhythmic pulse of her wings, she fanned the cool air, whispering incantations, willing the spark of vitality back into him. In that mystical moment, a miracle occurred. Life, potent and divine, stirred within the silent king. It was a temporary reprieve, a stolen moment outside the laws of nature. From this brief, magical reunion, a new life was conceived. A son, Horus, who would carry the legacy of his father and the magic of his mother. It was a victory, profound and absolute, but Isis knew it was fleeting. The world was still out of balance, and Set's shadow still loomed large over the two lands. Her joy was tempered by the urgent realization that she now had more to protect than ever before. A sleeping king and an unborn heir. While Isis celebrated her fragile victory, Set paced the halls of his usurped palace. Power had not brought him peace. The throne felt hollow, the crown heavy with paranoia. He was haunted by the ghost of his brother, a persistent whisper that Osiris's influence was not truly gone. This unease drove him out into the night, to hunt under the cold light of the full moon. He chose the Nile Delta, the same marshes where Isis had hidden her precious secret. It was as if some dark instinct, a twisted echo of their shared bloodline, guided his steps. He moved through the reeds, his senses sharp, searching for prey. But the quarry he found was far greater and far more infuriating than any desert animal. There, half hidden in a thicket, was the cedar chest from Byblos. He recognized it instantly. The sight sent a shockwave of pure rage through him. His carefully constructed plan, his perfect betrayal, had been undone. Isis, his clever and persistent sister, had found Osiris. The realization that his brother was back on Egyptian soil, even in his inert state, was more than Set's pride could bear. His jealousy, a poison he had nurtured for years, now consumed him completely. He had tried to contain his brother, to remove him from sight and memory. But it was not enough. As long as Osiris existed in any form, he remained a threat, a symbol of the legitimate order Set had overthrown. In that moment, under the stark moonlight, Set's ambition curdled into something far more destructive. He decided that Osiris could not simply be imprisoned or hidden. He had to be erased. In a final, terrible act of desecration, he sundered the body of the once great king. This was more than just an attack. It was a symbolic shattering of the very concept of monarchy and divine order. To ensure Osiris could never be made whole again, Set took the pieces and scattered them across the length and breadth of Egypt. Each fragment was cast far and wide, from the northernmost swamps to the southernmost cataracts. It was a calculated act of chaos, designed to make any attempt at recovery impossible. With this, Set believed he had won. He had not just defeated his brother, he had annihilated him, ensuring his own reign would be absolute and unchallenged forever. The consequences of Set's actions were immediate and catastrophic. A tremor went through the cosmic order of Egypt. The land itself seemed to recoil in shock. The predictable rhythm of the Nile faltered, the sun seemed less brilliant, and a creeping sense of unease settled over the people. The divine harmony, known as Ma'at, had been broken, and its fracture was felt in every aspect of life. Set's rule, once merely illegitimate, now became openly tyrannical, maintained by fear in a kingdom that had lost its spiritual center. When word of this ultimate desecration reached Isis, it was a blow beyond imagining. The hope she had so carefully nurtured in the Delta marshes was extinguished. But her despair, though profound, was not her final response. It was the catalyst for her transformation. The queen and wife gave way to something more elemental, a symbol of unwavering resolve. Her love for Osiris would not be defeated by this barbarity. It would become the fuel for a new, more arduous quest. This was no longer a search for a single, hidden object. It was a sacred pilgrimage, a painstaking effort to reassemble a shattered god and, with him, a shattered nation. She would not be alone. Her sister Nephthys, who had once been Set's consort but was now fully allied with the cause of order, joined her side. Their shared purpose forged an unbreakable bond between them. Together, they began the seemingly impossible task. They built a small skiff from papyrus reeds and set out upon the Nile, the great river that had been both a cradle of life and now a witness to this great tragedy. Their journey was a map of devotion. They followed the river's course, scanning the banks, questioning fishermen, and listening to whispers carried on the wind. They searched every province, every town, every sacred grove. The task was monumental, the odds overwhelming. Yet they persisted, driven by a love that refused to accept defeat. After weeks of relentless searching, their perseverance was rewarded. On the muddy bank of the river near the city of Dendera, Isis found the first piece. Holding the sacred relic, a wave of renewed determination washed over her. It was a small victory against an immense darkness, a single note of hope in a symphony of despair. The journey was far from over, but it was no longer impossible. The question now was not if she could find the rest, but what it would take to make a fragmented god whole once more. Isis's long search was more than a physical journey. It was a profound act of remembrance. With every step she took, she was not just recovering a lost king, but actively resisting the erasure that Set had intended. Her mourning was not a passive state of helplessness. It was a powerful, creative force that would forever reshape the spiritual landscape of Egypt. As she and Nephthys traversed the kingdom, from the fertile plains of the north to the stark deserts of the south, their quest became a sacred mission. Each time they recovered one of the scattered pieces, Isis performed a holy ritual. She would not simply take the fragment and move on. Instead, she consecrated the very ground where it was found. She established a shrine, a place of memory, decreeing that this spot would forever be revered as a place where a part of the great Osiris had rested. In doing so, she wove the story of her love and loss into the very fabric of the land. Temples and chapels sprang up in these locations, becoming the great cult centers of Osiris that would dominate Egyptian religion for millennia. Her journey transformed Egypt into a living monument to her husband. Her personal sorrow was said to have a cosmic echo. The ancient Egyptians believed that the annual inundation of the Nile, the life-giving flood that nourished their entire civilization, was caused by the tears Isis shed for her lost husband. Her grief was not a source of destruction, but the wellspring of life itself, a testament to how deeply her story was intertwined with the fate of her people. She was the devoted wife, the protector of the sacred, and the mother of the nation, whose sorrow ensured its survival. After a long and arduous search, she had achieved the near impossible. Piece by piece, she had gathered the dispersed essence of her husband. 13 parts had been found and sanctified, but her work was not yet complete. A final, crucial part remained lost, having been consumed by a fish in the Nile. It was a devastating setback. The laws of magic and divinity were precise. For Osiris to be reborn, he had to be complete. Without this final piece, her entire quest, her monumental effort, might have been in vain. All her devotion had brought her to the edge of triumph, only to face an obstacle that seemed truly insurmountable. Faced with an incomplete Osiris, Isis did not surrender to despair. Instead, she revealed the true depth of her power. She was not merely a queen or a devoted wife. She was great of magic, a goddess whose command of the arcane arts was second to none. With the 13 recovered pieces laid out, she called upon the aid of other deities who valued order over chaos. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, lent his knowledge of ancient rituals. Anubis, the master of embalming, offered his skills in preservation. Together, under Isis's direction, they began the sacred work. The problem of the missing piece required an act of pure creation. Where the physical world had failed, magic would provide. Isis used her divine power, her knowledge of life's essential patterns, to fashion a perfect replacement. With her own hands, she sculpted a form that made her husband whole again. Her love was so powerful, it could literally recreate what had been lost. Now complete, the body of Osiris was ready for its final transformation. In a solemn, holy rite, Isis and Nephthys carefully wrapped him in strips of clean white linen. Each layer was bound with magical amulets and anointed with sacred oils, while they chanted the spells that would protect him on his journey. This was the first act of mummification, a ritual born of love and necessity that would define Egyptian funerary practices for thousands of years. It was not meant to simply preserve the flesh, but to create a new, eternal body, a vessel fit for a god who would transcend the physical realm. The ritual was complete. Osiris was whole, protected, and prepared. Now came the final, most powerful act of magic. Once more, Isis transformed, her body taking the form of the divine kite. She rose into the air above her husband, a living symbol of resurrection. She beat her magnificent wings, not to cool the air, but to create a divine wind, the very breath of life. But this was not a return to his former, mortal existence. The life she breathed into him now was eternal. Through her unyielding devotion and supreme magic, Osiris was reborn, He had conquered the finality of his end. He would not walk among mortals again, but would rise to rule a new kingdom, the Duat, the afterlife. He became the just judge of souls, the Lord of eternity. Death had been defeated, not by escaping it, but by transforming it into a new and powerful beginning, all thanks to a love that refused to say goodbye. Isis, once the queen of a vibrant and prosperous land, was now a solitary wanderer. Her royal garments were replaced by the simple robes of a mourner, her heart heavy with a grief that could shatter mountains. Yet, within that sorrow, was a core of unyielding resolve. Love, in its most potent form, had become her compass and her shield. Set's act of dismemberment was not merely an assault on Osiris. It was an attempt to obliterate his memory, to scatter his essence so completely that he could never be made whole. It was a challenge to the very concept of order, and Isis would not allow chaos to claim the final victory. Her quest began in the shadows, a desperate pilgrimage through the land she once ruled alongside her husband. She followed the winding path of the great river, the lifeblood of Egypt, which had so cruelly become the vessel of her husband's dispersal. Her sister, Nephthys, who had been tricked into aiding Set, now joined Isis, her own remorse fueling her determination. Together, the two sisters became a force of nature, their shared purpose a silent vow whispered over the waters. They searched the dense papyrus thickets where crocodiles lurked and the sun beat down relentlessly. They combed the muddy banks after the annual inundation, hoping the receding waters would reveal what had been lost. Isis used her profound knowledge of magic, chanting ancient words that made the reeds bend to her will and the birds of the air her eyes in the sky. She called upon Anubis, the jackal-headed guide of souls, whose knowledge of the hidden paths between worlds was unparalleled. He helped her sense the divine energy lingering in the scattered pieces. One by one, through tireless searching and divine intuition, she found them. Each discovery was both a moment of profound sadness and a spark of renewed hope. A piece found in the sacred city of Abydos, another near the Great Pyramids, another still in the remote southern lands. She lovingly wrapped each fragment in clean linen, treating them with the reverence due to a god. Finally, after a journey that seemed to span an eternity, she had gathered 13 pieces. The king was almost complete, almost ready for the great rite she envisioned. But the final, most essential part remained lost, consumed by a fish in the river, forever beyond her reach. The body of the king was incomplete. Without it, how could the lineage continue? How could a new heir be conceived to challenge the usurper? Isis stood with the fruits of her labor, facing an obstacle that seemed to mock her efforts, a final, cruel twist in her tragic fate. With the recovered pieces of Osiris arranged on a stone slab, Isis prepared for her ultimate act of defiance. This was not merely a plea to the gods, it was a command directed at the fabric of reality itself. She intended to bend the rules of life and the afterlife, to weave a spell so powerful it would momentarily reverse the irreversible. Nephthys stood beside her, their voices blending in a hypnotic chant, reciting incantations from sacred texts that spoke of creation and renewal. The air in the hidden chamber grew thick with power, the torchlight flickering as if in a strong wind. Anubis, the master embalmer, performed his sacred duties. He anointed the fragments with precious oils and resins, skillfully binding them together with strips of pure white linen. In this secret ritual, the art of mummification was born, a process designed to preserve the physical form as a vessel for the eternal soul. But preservation alone was not enough. Isis needed life, even if only for a moment. Calling upon her deepest reserves of power, she transformed. Her arms elongated into great feathered wings, her form becoming that of a divine kite, a graceful bird of prey. She hovered above Osiris, beating her magnificent wings. This was no ordinary movement. With each powerful downstroke, she channeled the breath of life itself, directing a current of magical air into his prepared form. It was a spell of animation, a whisper of vitality in the face of stillness. Yet, the most significant challenge remained. To ensure the continuation of his line, the king had to be made fully whole. The missing piece was a symbol of his creative power, his ability to bring forth life. Undeterred, Isis, the goddess of creation, would create it herself. She molded a replacement from the clay of the riverbank and sanctified it with gold, infusing it with her own potent magic until it pulsed with generative energy. With this final piece in place, she completed her spell. For a brief, sacred interval, Osiris opened his eyes. He was not fully returned to the world of the living. That bridge had been irrevocably crossed, but his spirit was present, his consciousness restored. In that timeless moment, their love transcended all boundaries. It was a union not of flesh, but of pure magic and divine will. From this sacred rite, a new life was conceived. Horus, the heir who would one day avenge his father. The great work was done. Osiris had been remembered, and his legacy was now secured. His time in the mortal realm was over, but a new destiny awaited him in the west. Osiris could not remain. The magic of Isis, while powerful enough to create life and secure a future, could not permanently tether him to a world he no longer belonged to. His journey was not over. It was simply entering its next and most profound phase. He had to cross the threshold into the Duat, the Egyptian realm of the afterlife. This was not a descent into some gloomy abyss, but a destined path toward a new kind of existence. In doing so, Osiris became a pioneer, blazing a trail that every righteous soul in Egypt would hope to one day follow. He became the first of the Westerners, a title of honor signifying his primacy in the land where the sun sets. The Duat was a complex, mystical landscape, filled with trials, gateways guarded by fearsome spirits, and rivers of fire. But for Osiris, it became a kingdom. He brought order to this once chaotic realm, transforming it into a structured domain of judgment and potential rebirth. At its heart was the Hall of Two Truths, where he would preside over the final judgment of all souls. Here, the ultimate test took place, the weighing of the heart. The deceased person's heart, believed to be the seat of their intellect and conscience, was placed on one side of a great golden scale. On the other was the single, weightless feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. Anubis would oversee the balance, while Thoth, the scribe of the gods, recorded the verdict. Osiris sat on his throne, not as a fearsome judge, but as a serene and compassionate king. He had experienced betrayal and dissolution himself, and he understood the struggles of existence. If the heart was lighter than the feather, proving a life lived in balance and righteousness, Osiris would welcome the soul into his eternal kingdom, the Field of Reeds, a perfect, idealized version of Egypt where they would live forever in peace and plenty. This was his revolutionary promise. Immortality was not just for kings and gods. Through virtue and piety, it was attainable for all. He had conquered his own end not by returning to his former life, but by mastering the realm beyond it. He became a symbol of hope, the proof that life could triumph over its own cessation. His green skin in depictions symbolized not decay, but the new growth of vegetation and the promise of resurrection. Osiris, the broken king, was now the eternal ruler of the West, a silent, powerful sovereign offering a path to eternity for all his people. While Osiris established his eternal kingdom, Isis faced a new and perilous struggle in the world of the living. She was now a fugitive, hunted by the very forces that controlled her homeland. Her priority was no longer her husband, but the divine child she carried within her, Horus, the rightful heir to the throne. To protect him from the murderous rage of his uncle Set, Isis fled to the most remote and impenetrable place she could find, the vast, labyrinthine papyrus swamps of the Nile Delta. Here, in the wetlands teeming with life and danger, the Queen of Egypt became a refugee. She raised her son in absolute secrecy, surrounded by the constant threat of discovery. The marsh was a microcosm of the chaotic world under Set's rule. Every rustle in the reeds, every shadow on the water, could be a servant of the usurper. Isis had to be constantly vigilant, using her magic not for grand rituals, but for the daily tasks of survival and protection. She wove spells of concealment to hide their presence and wards of safety to repel the dangerous creatures of the swamp. One famous story tells of a day when Isis returned to find her infant son, Horus, lying motionless, having been stung by a poisonous scorpion sent by Set. Overcome with anguish, Isis let out a cry so powerful it stopped the gods in their tracks. Her lament was a magical invocation, a demand for justice that reached the heavens. She declared that the sun boat of Ra himself would not move, and the world would be plunged into a standstill until her son was healed. The great sun god heard her plea and sent Thoth, the god of wisdom and magic, to restore the child. This incident proved two things: the depths of Isis's maternal devotion and the immense power she now wielded. She was no longer just a wife seeking vengeance. She was the divine mother, the protector of the legitimate king. She raised Horus on stories of his father's greatness and his uncle's treachery. She taught him that he was the heir of two worlds, the physical land of Egypt his father had ruled, and the divine realm of the gods from which he descended. In the isolation of the swamp, Horus grew from a vulnerable child into a strong and determined young god, his character forged by hardship and his destiny clear in his mind. The time for hiding was drawing to a close. The boy had become a warrior, ready to emerge from the reeds and challenge the chaotic rule of his uncle. The future of Egypt rested on his shoulders. The emergence of Horus from the Delta marshes marked the beginning of a new chapter in the cosmic struggle. The conflict that followed was not merely a dispute over inheritance, it was the ultimate battle between Ma'at, the principle of divine order and justice, and Isfet, the force of chaos and violence. The fate of the entire cosmos hung on the outcome. Before a tribunal of the gods, Horus laid his claim to the throne. What ensued was a series of 83 contests, a prolonged struggle that tested both Horus and Set to their absolute limits. These were not only brutal physical confrontations, but also battles of magic, cunning, and endurance. In one famous episode, they transformed into hippopotamuses to see who could remain submerged the longest. In another, they raced boats made of stone, a contest Horus won through cleverness by crafting his boat from wood painted to look like stone, while Set's solid rock vessel sank immediately. The most iconic confrontation resulted in Horus losing an eye to Set's ferocity. The eye was not destroyed, but was magically restored by the wisdom of Thoth. This healed eye, the Wadjet, became one of ancient Egypt's most powerful symbols, representing healing, restoration, protection, and wholeness. It was a testament to the idea that even in the face of chaos, order could be restored. After years of conflict, the divine tribunal, led by the creator gods, finally reached its verdict. They declared Horus the rightful heir. His claim was just, his cause aligned with the principles that held the universe together. Horus the Younger triumphantly took his place on the throne of his father, uniting the lands of Upper and Lower Egypt under his just rule. The age of chaos was over. Set was not annihilated. The Egyptians understood that chaos could never be truly extinguished. Instead, he was subdued and given dominion over the harsh, untamed deserts and foreign lands, his power contained at the borders of civilization. With her son on the throne of the living and her husband ruling the realm of the afterlife, Isis's long and arduous quest reached its triumphant conclusion. The story became the archetypal foundation for all Egyptian civilization. Every pharaoh who ruled was seen as the living incarnation of Horus. When he passed on, he became Osiris, journeying to the west to rule in eternity, while his son, the new pharaoh, took his place as the living Horus on earth. This was the ultimate victory, not just the restoration of a single king, but the establishment of an eternal, unbreakable cycle of life, transition, and rebirth, ensuring the stability of Egypt forever.